Welcome to our next episode for our 6 followers. We appreciate everybody. Actually, I think we actually do have more than 6. I've been corrected by the.
I think we do, which is strange to admit that we've engendered some degree of interest in our random ramblings, but it's good to be with you guys again.
We even got some fan mail from one of our listeners saying that they actually enjoyed it.
Yes.
But yeah, and interesting enough, I got a message from one of my family members just laughing, which I wasn't sure what that meant, but that's okay. So this episode's about growth mode, which is glow up and not burn out. So Max, when you define growth mode and burnout, what do you think?
When I think about growth, I think of ways of, building on a strong base that you've developed over a period of time, right? It's not something that you do one thing one day that immediately you're at another level. The fast-paced world of innovation happens in leaps and starts, but there are days in between those step change functions. And to me, when I think about growth mode, I think about trying to think on building, success on success on success. And burnout, I think, can happen when that treadmill, as it were, always feels kind of infinite, right? Like I'm always growing, but I never reach the finish line. And I think burnout is something that can happen when you don't pay attention to yourself and the people and the things around you, right? And so I think approaching a growth mode or a kind of period of expansion, not as a set defined period of time, but as a kind of perpetual motion that you can perfect over time is kind of how I think about it. What about you, Mike? What do you think?
Well, given I'm over 6 feet tall, I've experienced a lot of growth. Listen, growth for me is sort of the fun side of business. Like the adage is you never shrink to greatness, right? So to me, I think growth is fun because there's always challenges, and you and I are similar in the sense that you've got to give us another mountain to climb, and we'll go climb it. And
right.
So your point is really valid about we're always in growth mode because we always will look for challenges, and quite frankly, we'll create them if there are none.
Sure.
But I think personally, it sort of comes to the idea of burnout is just sort of the dedication you give to the daily challenges becomes a bit of all consuming, and then you kind of need to sort of put the professional brakes on.
Yeah.
And I think we have tools to manage, like individually, we found each other have tools to manage that, both yelling at each other, which gets it out, but
surprisingly therapeutic for those that can imagine that.
I lose most of those arguments, by the way, but I think we found tools. What like just going back to those tools? What are you give an example of a good burnout and a tool you might have used?
It's a good segue, right? So I think one of the things that I've had experience with at different times in my career, to your point about being kind of consumed by the day to day, that sometimes you miss the forest for the trees. There was a period of time in my earlier career before I joined Alurica when I was working so many hours in a day and doing a lot of what I thought was really, really, kind of valuable work. And some of it was, and some of it wasn't. But what I noticed about myself was when I first started doing this job, which was in the investment banking space, I didn't really pay any attention to my physical health because I thought it paid no, there was no corollary in benefits to my mental health. And so, I ate the wrong kinds of foods all the time. If you're hungry and Chinese food sounds great at 3 a.m, you get it. This, that, the other. And then I realized that the worse I felt physically as a function of doing this job, it was very, kind of mentally demanding and also time intensive. That by not, taking an hour in the morning before work, even if that meant getting a little less sleep, or trying to sneak out for even 30 minutes during the lunchtime when the work wasn't as heavy, rather than just, kind of catch up on current events, and go to a gym and work out, get some, get the blood pumping, get some, perspire a little bit, really helped me think more clearly, and help me just get in, kind of a better headspace. That mental burnout that you think is just mental and that there's no connection to the physical, when in actuality, there is a benefit. Now, I will say, as one quick funny story, I maybe, as I tend to do in my life at times, took this to an extreme. And I remember getting a trainer and convincing myself I was going to run a triathlon as an investment banking analyst, which if anyone has ever done that, they realize how stupid that is because there's just no possible way you can work out that much. But sometimes it was just pointing me in the right direction. I don't know. How about you, Mike? What's been a burnout experience for you and how you try to manage that?
Not too dissimilar. I'll only add one thing. I think there's sort of this mental break. You've got to find a way to kind of stop thinking about it.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes we talk about this all the time. Sometimes it's a walk, or it's
Yeah.
it's literally finding the one thing to just sort of reset your mind. Reading. When you do a lot of reading, I do a ton of reading, and we're funny because we read 25 things at one time. But they're they're those reading are mental breaks to sort of take your mind off of the things you think about, which is 24/7 the business. And everybody says, well, it must be hard. The answer is the mental side is harder than almost the physical side of doing a job like this, right? Where
Yeah.
you just get hit with so many transactions, right? There's so many different kinds of things that sort of move you through the day, and at the end of the day, you sort of tally up, did you get anything done? And you're like, I didn't do anything today. But you made a lot of people's day, but you didn't make yourself one. I was a football guy, right?
Mhm.
And when you're playing football and little kids, you're playing the old USA football or Pop Warner for the really old people on the phone, and then you get into high school and then get to college, and then one day you play your last game, and that's the last day you hit somebody.
Well, the last day you should hit somebody, probably, but
But like you've been playing for 15 years, and then all of a sudden you stop. Like it just stops. And the similar mental game, right, in your head, which is I've been always trained on trying to take this person down or recover that football or push more into the pile, and then one day that stops. It's the same metaphor in business. Is sort of
yeah,
you're trained so much, and then you one day have to take a break because you realize that that's not the instincts are not healthy. What's interesting, if you flip it around the other way, is this sort of connection to balance, right? Which we're trying to get to right now, which is balance versus like we push for performance, right? That's our jobs,
of
but
course.
we push hard, and as CEOs of the company, we have to push. Um, at the end of the day, we all know everybody does their jobs in their swim lanes, and the expectation is there. But we also get to the sort of boundaries of things, right? So when you think of balance and boundaries, sort of, what's your thoughts about how you approach each of those things?
Well, I think you ignore them at your own peril, right?
Hmm.
In our job, the sheer volume of transactions that come at us from an array of directions, and even having two of us do this together, it's still a lot because we're trying to cover twice as much ground. um, and I think the like you said, whether it's a mental break for me of doing a crossword puzzle or
Hmm.
reading a fictional book or working out or doing something like that, the only person that's going to know what works for you is you and how you experience stress and how you deal with it. I think there's a gradient of things that are healthier and unhealthier to deal with, but I really think you know a lot of our people that we talk to all the time are very ambitious, right? And Loricans have this passion in them. They want to keep doing more and more things, and kind of see their career continue to progress, and that's great, and that's what makes a great company. But it also, if you do that and ignore the balance or putting boundaries on certain things, it can cause you to have days which aren't your best, and your performance actually could suffer, right? So the thing that I think is somewhat counterintuitive, as I'm trying to get back into working out more, thanks to you, of course, that now I'm trying to eat only chicken and rice, thanks to you. Um, uh, One of the things I've really kind of observed as getting older now, and unfortunately I'm starting to approach Mike's age, but thankfully we'll always have a little bit.
You'll never catch me.
I'm never going to get. Um, is that sometimes just as much as important as the workout is the recovery, right? Whether it's
Mm,
stretching
mm,
or cool down or whatever the case may be, because you work out too many times in a row, you do too many things at the same time, you read too many books, you're gonna be like, I'm done reading for a while, I don't want to do that. And I think putting a boundary,
mm,
for trying to give balance to your life is really important. There was a piece by Calm Health, right? That, almost 60% of employees agree they're always connected or available for work, right? So
mm.
what that must mean to those people is they feel like they're always at work. But how do you think about balance when you're trying to, create, change or drive an ambitious outcome for your team or yourself? Like, how do you think about balance when you're always connected by your phone, or you always there's an urgent matter that comes up every hour of the day, whether it's 6 a.m. today, or whether it's 1 a.m. tomorrow morning? How do you think about injecting more balance and stuff into your ambition and your people's team's ambitions?
It's an interesting question. Because we talk so much. So what I did was I actually used my little Mac guy, and I talked to him when you're not available. The balance thing is tough, and you know that we're probably in these positions because we're out of balance more
Yeah.
so than we're in balance. So giving anybody our advice on this is kind of tough because we just enjoy working a lot when the work we're doing is meaningful,
Yeah.
and it feels valued. I think we are in a groove and we're at our best. When the work is being called stupid or challenged, or look, everything's going to have imperfections, there's always going to be soft spots on the underbelly that everyone will expose. No business is perfect. If you're trying to be perfect, good luck. You're never going to get there.
No.
Um, but in all of those cases, we're better when we're charged with missions and objectives, and we're charged with driving, as
Mhm.
opposed to, I'll call it looking at all of the warts and trying to perfect them. But in the case of that balance, I think this, you connected two dots for me that are tough, which is the sort of always connected technology issue that we face today. It sort of brings you into this position where you're on point 24/7.
Yeah.
And there is this pressure, I think, by most leaders of a company that everybody should be available at all times. And I think that's a mistake. I think there's a respect to those boundaries and risks that we as CEOs try our best to stick to, which is, we really want you to have your personal time because you're at your best when you've had it and you can put efforts into your craft here. And if you don't get that personal time, like vacations or time with the family or just mental breaks, then you're bringing a lot to the table you don't have to,
Hmm.
which is, the stress of things that happen outside of work, which quite frankly are quite massive, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's tough. Like, we've done things to be able to balance those things probably better than others, I would say, but they still hit you. And any kind of, I'll call it any kind of disruption to the family structure that we both face causes us angst
Yeah.
in that kind of balance of things. But Max, the one question I think I'd ask you back is, look, you're the co-CEO of a $2 billion company, right? How do you manage realistic expectations?
We wouldn't ask you to do something we wouldn't do ourselves. And I
Mm.
think sometimes we can be accused of having unrealistic expectations of those things. And I think remembering the timeline and what you're asking, and listening to issues why it might be possible to do faster or might be possible to do slower or bigger or smaller, whatever the case may be, I think is important as a leader. But I think one of the things that you and I sometimes simultaneously get frustrated by is, the joke I make all the time, which is generalizations are never true, right? That that not every request is unrealistic, or not, everything is not a 6 month project, or not everything requires us to boil the ocean. Some things do, and
Mhm.
some things don't. And I think being the best leaders at Aloric and the best leaders I've worked with over my career have been realistic, not afraid to tell uh, difficult truths, and have been able to have that conversation with people that lead them, and the people that are leading them
Mhm.
are able to hear them, acknowledge the issue, help work through it, or pivot the expectation setting as a function of a new piece of facts that they may not have been aware of. I would say, what you said about honing your craft. When I first started managing teams of people, I had this, saying, which was, shoot for the stars, and if you can't get all the way there, we'll settle for the moon. We'll still do an amazing thing in this period of time. I think the thing I would say with both expectation settings and the like, um, is also, you know you said it really well, and I'll say it the kind of the opposite way, which was, those that try to be perfect will never be, and it's not a good way to run a business. If you're scared to fail, you're never really going to be great. So it's about balance, and I think you and I try to espouse this and live by that motto. When so just a friendly PSA: if there's any Aloricans out there listening, if it's 3 a.m. and Mike and I happen to be at an airport together, responding to emails and catching up as we're in transit, it does not mean you have to reply that second, right? Like, there is a boundary. We don't expect that. Now, if it's 3 weeks later, that's a different story. What would your take be like? Because I know you get asked that question. I was like, Mike, come on, the thing you're asking me to do, I can't possibly do it, man. Like, it's just not possible.
I think the one thing we've learned is to right size our expectation.
Mhm.
And it took a little while to figure that out for us. There's also this, like, you should make sure that what you're asking the person to be able to accomplish is a reasonable request for the person being asked.
My wife makes this analogy all the time, and I think it's a really good one. Is that people have, to your point about knowing your boundaries and knowing your team's boundaries, people have plates, and they can handle so much stuff on that plate, right? And whether that plate is a one ply piece of paper towel, and that's not a lot of stuff you can put on that plate, or it's a titanium piece of sheet metal. putting the right things on the right people's plates is the right way to get the outcomes that you want and avoid burnout. I think, the thing we say all the time, right, is to try to get a little bit better tomorrow than you are today, be it in your balance so that your work product gets better, to your point about honing your craft, making what you do meaningful. And I think not being afraid to raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to do this thing and gain some be curious about something to make this task, even if it's somewhat repetitious, a little more meaningful. I have an idea. We can make something better. Wasn't asked of you, but I have an idea. I think people tend to really thrive in that environment. And I couldn't let the moment go without giving my final, like, kind of quippy plug, which I got from a friend of mine at a bank, which was, he goes, when I took this job, and I have a plaque of this in my office, not here, but somewhere else, which basically says that you're on a perpetual roadshow, right? If you think about your career as a perpetual roadshow, where you have to show up each day a little bit better than you did the day before, and constantly being asked questions, and hold yourself in that esteem, you'll do great, and you won't have to worry as much about burnout or those kinds of things, because tomorrow's always going to be another day. The sun will rise, and we'll have a new problem to solve. And so that's what I would say. But I hand it to you for your more esteemed, astute wisdom, for your years of experience.
I'm only 1 year older than Max.
That's right. It's been a tough year, though. I'll tell you that.
Just listen, growth is great. Watch the burnout. I think we have tools ourselves that we use to manage it. I think everybody's can find their own tools, whether it's journaling or other things. Music. I know you play the guitar really well because it's in the background, so you're all set with that. I have a ukulele.
Mike does an excellent job of flamenco dancing, so we'll have to do that on a future podcast. Stay tuned.
I do. Yeah, I do. It's mostly salsa, but it's okay. Flamenco, he calls it. I look like a bird. But listen, we appreciate you guys listening to our fun podcast, and we will see you again in next month.
Take care, everybody.